views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Demon Folklorist, or if this is your first time meeting me, hello. Yes, I am the Demon Folklorist, and if you've been listening a while, you know what that means, so you can just skip ahead for a few seconds. But for those who don't know what it means, I study the narratives, experiences, and phenomena of demons through classification, something I created when I was getting my master's in folklore from Utah State. Excellent folklore program if you're interested. I classify experiences generally negative by sight, sound, smell, and feeling, but my main interest, of course, is demons. My book on the subject, The Black Hours, Modern Demonic Experiences and Folklore, will be republished at some point, probably next year, and I'll give more info on that when I have it. I've begun to expand my research into different types of negative experiences and even fairly neutral experiences. Because truthfully, I'm interested in how we perceive the supernatural and what different entities can and cannot do in our world. I want to be able to tell them all apart. I got into this work because I had a possession experience at 19. That's my little credential spiel, but welcome to whatever's going on inside my head at any given time. They basically become podcast episodes. You never know what you might find. Today we're going to be talking about possessions in Connecticut, the Arn Johnson and David Glatzel cases. And I have a new microphone, so I'm just winging it, hoping this turns out good. Historically, they haven't really whenever I do a demon one, but, we're going to do what we can. In 1981, Arn Cheyenne Johnson was arrested and charged with the murder of Alan Bono, who was his and his fiancée Debbie's friend. Also Debbie's boss. He was also their landlord. Johnson claimed to be possessed when the murder took place, and this is the storyline of The Conjuring 3. Not my favorite movie, because I think it is actually the least accurate of the entire series so far, and I think they're just getting less and less accurate, probably because they think they can do better than people who actually work with demonic phenomena, but whatever. Anyway, so this case, like in the movie, actually begins with the case of 11-year-old David Glatzel. Debbie Glatzel is Arn's girlfriend, and David comes to see Arn and Debbie's new place that they'd be sharing with Mary Johnson, who is Arn's mother. I think it was like sort of a duplex situation, and it was seemingly demon-infested. David walks into a room with a waterbed, and this actually happens in the movie. I would say the entire sequence with David Glatzel in the first part of The Conjuring 3 is actually fairly accurate. But anyway, he was shoved onto this bed by invisible hands, and he saw a transparent apparition of a man that pointed at him and told him beware. He would not go back to the house no matter what, because nobody else in his family had really picked up on it. Like, they picked up on something, but not to the level that David did. He wouldn't go back into the house, and he was very glum and downhearted, which is very strange for him. He was a fairly happy kid. He also was answering back very uncharacteristically. He was already acting different in this one interaction that he had had at the house because he could now remote view the house. And yeah, that is what it sounds like. He could see into the house when he was miles away in Brookfield. This was in Newport. So very, very strange. And automatically just this one brush with this entity, and he could do this. And Debbie and Arn were going to move into this place. There were some issues. And then the dog had started to freak out. They had left their puppy there overnight. And he actually ended up hurting himself trying to get into this mysterious storage room that wouldn't open. And my thought is wouldn't the animal be trying to get out if this was demon infested? But no matter. The old man ghost thing changed, according to David, when the sun went down, to a red figure with a big white face with deep tunnel-like black eyes and small horns, cloven feet, a tail, and even a goatee. Jagged teeth, like a classic medieval, and then more of like a recent idea of what a devil looks like. David began to correctly predict the future right after this event based on what this thing was telling him, and his remote viewing eventually got to the point where he could see through and hear through all the walls in his house as well. He would also use words and phrases that he didn't know the meaning of because this thing was like constantly speaking to him. This place also seemed to stir up very passionate anger immediately between the young couple, who got in a fight on their first day, which was very strange for Debbie to be so angry. She had plenty to be angry about, though. Like, the landlord had sort of gone back on their word, and there was money, and it's not a good situation. Who wouldn't be mad about that, right? And a place that was supposed to be moved into actually wasn't, because there was an issue with the previous tenant not having vacated yet, and they weren't going to for like half a month. And they'd already paid for the month. So that's pretty messed up. And then Judy, who is David's mother, she noticed a very distinct creepy feeling about the place, that it wasn't a happy home, and she just didn't like it. David's brothers, Carl and Alan, also had a very weird episode in the water bedroom. The door locked by itself, and their voices should have carried to everyone else while they were yelling for help didn't travel at all. So they were sort of in like that psychic bubble that comes up in a lot of demonic cases, where activity is happening, but if you're in the bubble, nobody outside of the bubble can hear you. This happens a lot with like psychic sleep with couples. You could be screaming your head off during an attack with the demonic, and your partner won't even wake up because you're in the bubble. It was also mentioned that Judy tried to clean the place, but there was like a deep haze and a dullness on everything. This is something else that happens in demonic cases, where darkness has sort of set into a place, and this house just bred all sorts of animosity between everybody just by being in it for a little while. Now, this unfortunately translated to Arn and his mother, Mary. Mary just didn't want to hear it that the house was haunted, and they tried to tell her. It clearly was, and it got to a point where she eventually fled after this place scared the crap out of her children, who were, Arn's sisters, and ruined their lives a little bit. As for Carl, he was David's brother. This thing would like whisper to him to make trouble and stir everybody up. And it was put forth that Carl Jr. was sort of acting this way due to denial. It was probably that too, let's be honest. But to have such a horrendous change come over someone in such a short period of time, it makes me think that the entities were working on him too, influencing him. Just having them nearby can cause such harm to a person, especially a teen. My guess is that they were using him to continually create discord, anger, and fear to feed on. This demon began threatening everyone who didn't obey it or butt out of the situation, and would often threaten the boy. And then eventually, as its power grew, this entity began to physically torture David because it claimed to want his soul. And you got to remember, David Glatzel is 11 years old. This poor baby. He is being choked until he turns blue. They seemingly shot him, stabbed him, slapped him, hit him. They left marks and bruises of all kinds. At one point, it's like he stopped breathing and his heart gave out. Thankfully, most of these attacks and the pain that they were causing would dissipate quickly, but my God, poor David, Arn, who loved David like a brother, would challenge this thing to do it to him instead, and he would really just stand against this thing to try to stop it from hurting David with his own body, taking the brunt of the pain if he could. I really feel for this family. If this is a completely true story, these poor people. This entity very quickly began to manifest. It was quite the pervert and said horrifically disgusting things, mostly to David, like, ew, you don't want to hear that stuff, even if you're like a full-grown adult. So the idea that it's talking to an 11-year-old child, that's just fucking disgusting. But anyway, there was blasphemy all over the place about God, Jesus, and Mary. There were gale force winds that were directed only at their house while the neighbors were spared. It showed itself to David as 44 distinct spirits. 43 of them were helpers, while the main one he called the beast. The worst of the worst language that poor young David had probably never heard before in his life, but he was forced to repeat under the threat of pain because this thing wanted to scare them all. It wanted them to know who owned them, who owned this house, and who owned David. Some other phenomena that was happening is that there were Trinity knocks, and it would be stopped momentarily by holy water. There was this event where this thing was like trying to get into the house, but it somehow found a way in through the attic. There were Trinity knocks. Carl Jr. went through extremely hateful personality changes. There was booming from the attic so hard that it made the entire house shake. Scratching inside the living room walls, whispering, extreme temperature drops, nasty tricks like shutting off the AC system in the middle of summer when no one else could have accessed it because everything was locked and still locked. So there's no way a human being got in there. And the dad, Carl Sr., was able to outright ignore and deny a lot of the activity that was going on even when he experienced it. And maybe this was to divide the house and cause further discord because Carl Sr. just thought his son was mentally ill. You would be surprised at the lengths people will go to in denial to avoid having to admit something supernatural is happening. Judy also had her butt pinched by the entity, and I'm actually surprised that there were no instances of rape in this case being as severe as it was. But thankfully, these people were spared that horror. Other random happenings were that Judy had her hair pulled, Debbie's thigh being rubbed by an invisible force, Arn having his wrist grabbed by a freezing hand. All attempts to communicate or reason with this thing, I never recommend that, by the way, were met with either perversion or evasion. There was the levitation of objects, a hand forcing David's head down in church so that he had to stare at his shoes. And phenomena in a church, I do want to add, usually indicate something a little bit higher level. Just because even walking into a church as a lower level entity, I would think that it would be very painful for them. But the language and perversion, all of this indicates other lesser demons were helping because they're like the trash heap ones, helping cause chaos while the management is of higher intelligence. There was this rocking chair that the beast apparently liked to sit in and rock to alert the family of its presence. Judy would come into the kitchen every morning and find that all the chairs were pulled out from the table, and apparently David told them it was because this thing liked to sit there and have meetings in the kitchen about how best to fuck with this family. So great. Another thing is that objects were constantly being knocked off tables, really just all sorts of phenomena that are the hallmarks of the demonic was happening in this case. And there's also some lesser known ones too. Neighbors were experiencing phenomena, and more direct attacks would happen for people who tried to help the Glatzels in any way. There were also repeated manifestations of things over and over, which drove the family virtually insane. A description of the other entities that were accompanying the beast, because remember, David could see them all at all times. He had two main helpers. They were tall, thin, and wiry, with clawed fingers, cloven feet, and horns on their head. One had short horns, the other had horns like a steer. It was half man, half animal, with humanoid features. One had a bullet hole in his forehead and a face covered in blood, while the other one had a knife in his chest, where the heart would be. And they looked what's described as crazed and wild, with eyes that sometimes moved in different directions or would cross. And they'd often be just glaring at poor David, always talking about his soul. David also reported that when they were causing a ruckus in the house, the entities would laugh cruelly at everybody. Eventually, other people in the house began to see the beast at certain times, describing, unfortunately, what David had to a T. They tried to get help from the church, but the holy items that they were given just made the beast angry, and it took it out on David. Throwing holy objects, white bedspreads would have hoof prints and soot. And church help during this point could make them retreat for the time being, but they never fully left David alone. Toys came to life that would threaten this little boy. Like, my God, just this poor kid. Like, nothing was safe for him. If you got to think about it, like, not even his toys. they would even come to life to threaten him because of these fucking things. There was a blue orb that manifested when the three main spirits chanted, and it seemed to produce a portal for a fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh spirit. All of these varying ugliness and evil projected in different ways. More and more, there were 40 in total with whips, clubs, and steel weapons that they threatened David with. And it really just makes me wonder about weapons in the astral. But that's like a later thing because this comes back in this story. Now, I do want to talk about the movie a little bit just because the recording at the end of The Conjuring 3 doesn't convince me that it's demonic. There is that lack of spine separating effect. And that's just what I call it. It's where like your spine literally wants you away from this thing. That's how evil it is. That's how awful it is. But like clearly something was happening to David. But the thing is though, I might also be a little bit desensitized. This is what I do. I am not afraid of these things. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh yeah, like if a demon showed up right now, I would not be afraid. Of course I would. Your body is trying to protect you from these things. But being that I do this in my spare time, I'm the demon folklorist, it's really hard to freak me out, to be honest. But anyway, so there was also a mistake, and it's not really a mistake exactly. It's more like I got something only slightly wrong. So I had done an article for Haunt Jaunts about why this kind of possession wasn't possible, where it just like jumps into you and because you said, come into me instead, which is what happens in the movie. Arn is watching basically his little brother be terrorized, and he's like, you know what, pick on me instead, come in me instead. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along those lines. It's not possible in that way, at least, and that wasn't even how it happened in this case, but it was one of those things where the invitation helped a lot for them to oppress him. Arn was strong. He wanted to help David. Now, if somebody were to completely surrender to an entity, then yes, a demon could more easily take over, but there are probably processes that they still have to go through of oppression to weaken your will. You can let it in, but it's going to take time for it to fully take over. So it wasn't a mistake exactly, but I like to acknowledge it because as I learn and grow, I have to take into account the things that I'm learning on this journey because I'm still learning. You know, my wheelhouse is demonic phenomena, narratives, and experiences, but I am trying to expand that. I do want to know everything I can possibly know about demonology because I do find it fascinating. I know I'm the weirdo, like I find the darkest things to be fascinating. But anyway, I think possession is not an easy thing to do because you are having to surrender your will and your body to this thing. Now, some of the more Catholic stuff in this book is just preachy nonsense, like that because you're unbaptized or because you missed communion or are non-Catholic, you're an easy target. I would be dead now by that logic. I've never been baptized. I am not Catholic. I've never been to communion, but I'm not dead. I don't believe that I am any easier to possess than anybody else, or that living together before marriage is such a horrible thing when I'm sorry, but no matter how you feel about it, most people can't afford to live by themselves anymore. Also, marriage has gone way out of style. I'm just saying that there would be a lot more demonic interference in people's lives if those were the ways that they got in. That's all I'm really saying. So you can have your beliefs, but inserting them into demonology means they'll just get debunked because the church can say something's true until they're blue in the face, but that doesn't mean that the patterns of phenomena will support what they're telling you. I think, though, are important for us in demonology, these questions we should be asking, and that we shouldn't get our answers from just one source. Because I hate to be this way, especially for any listeners who are Catholic, because no offense, but the Catholic Church has an agenda, just really like any church has an agenda of things that they want from the people, probably belief, and to come to their services and to donate and all sorts of stuff, that it makes it difficult to believe every single thing they say. They are the authority on demonology. But that doesn't mean that they're sharing every single thing that they know about it. So I do want people to be thinking about that. The other thing about this case that I find really interesting is that demons tend actually not to pick on children to possess. Like, kids are kind of child's play for a demon. They're not usually the target. I would have thought that it was one of the adults who cared about David that it was targeting. This case also implies very heavily, at least in the book, that 11-year-old David is the one holding them off, and he is the one keeping them out of him. But compared to an adult, a child is like a fly to them. The body would become exhausted from the strain, and that many demons at once? I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm not saying that David Glatzel was lying or that Arn Cheyenne Johnson was lying, but at the same time, it's my job to look at these cases critically. Of course, I'm a little skeptical that an 11-year-old held them off, but then you think about the time period. This happened over the course of a month. Then it starts to make a little bit more sense. Because if this had been like a couple years, there's no way a kid could hold out against that kind of evil. But a month makes more sense. For a fully grown adult, it normally takes a lot more time. Months, years, right? To be able to pull off a full-on possession, because adults are usually, anyway, much more mature and able to deal with hardship than children. And then it's not that demons never have targeted children or teenagers, except those cases actually tend to go public. And I can't help, like, is this for shock value? That, like, demons are like, oh yeah, man, let's go possess this kid so it'll scare the crap out of modern America. Or is this a lack of mercy? Demons hate humans with everything in their being. So it doesn't matter to them if it's a child. It's a human child. To them, humans are less than nothing, and they want them all dead. David did put up a hell of a fight, though. And I am not diminishing his struggle at all. If this is a real case, because unfortunately I have to say that since it is an Ed and Lorraine Warren case, I didn't know them. I'm not going to sit here and defend or disparage them. It's more that I have to be skeptical because there are rumors that they made things up. So I'm looking at the phenomena specifically. And I like to look at the progression of things. But while under possession, David would threaten to kill everyone. He had a horrible aversion to holy objects that would result in threats or attacks if they were brought near him. He would snarl and growl like an animal. There was a whole lot of blasphemy, unnatural strength and unnatural knowing, distended swelling and manipulation of David's body. There were short periods where the demons would unexpectedly withdraw and suddenly go to the other house, the one with the waterbed in Newtown, probably to regroup or to maybe even give a false sense of safety. Then they'd announce their return with weird flies that filled up the place, but when they were hit with a fly swatter, they would fly again after laying still for a bit, or if they were hit with bug spray, they would disappear. This is an interesting piece of phenomena because it actually happened in the Perrin case. Once again, an Ed and Lorraine Warren case, but if the people who were living through it said that it happened, I'm inclined to believe them. There were all sorts of other kinds of troublesome manifestations, but then there was a total takeover of David, and the attacks on David once he was possessed just got so much worse. Everyone feared for his life. Everyone was hit and mortified to have all their private lives and all their sins read aloud by David like a book, because the beast was making him do it to humiliate everybody, telling them about things that had happened before he was born, and having all sorts of prophecies that would come true. There were pictures that were picking up odd spirit forms in them when they would take pictures, along with orbs. Arn was especially hated, and a car that he was in was acting of its own accord one day, which could have killed him because it toppled over and it was like racing towards a tree. He was literally saved by the peat and mulch on the ground because these things had the gas down, even though the brakes were on. Like, Debbie saw this whole thing. It was crazy. These things also really tried everything they could to keep the Warrens and the clergymen out who did get involved. They even used Carl Jr. To threaten them. And David would be sitting there insulting everyone while he was possessed, and it was total chaos what this poor family was living through. Different entities were posted in different places. They were having meetings in their kitchen in languages that David couldn't understand, probably so he wouldn't report back to his family. And only the main one ever really changed its appearance. They were inhuman, and very much so in how they didn't need to rest or eat or drink. They had knowledge of past, present, and future, and they even watched TV, apparently. I have always wondered, this is like a sidebar, but I've always wondered if demonic activity could have ever gone the extra level these days, and if they ever go on the internet, considering how pervasive it is now, and how does that work? I have no idea, but possess a person and go online? I don't know. Like, maybe they Google themselves every now and then, like I could see it. They're pretty self-obsessed. This thing's head was reported to be about as big as a door when it appeared one time to Arn, which, if my experience is correct, this fits because I had a huge hand with fingers that were bigger than my hands grab me around my throat and try to choke the life out of me, and then my mom had one grab her. I was in more of a sleep state, but she was awake, and it grabbed her in the dark, and she remembers it being that big as well. These are gigantic creatures. Arn at one point was also able to hit this thing, and according to David, it fell to the ground when he did it. This doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Assuming that it didn't enough of a corporeal form, demons don't have bodies, so this is really unlikely. Or it seems that attacking a spirit is actually possible, considering that in this case, they can use weapons on us from the spirit realm, so why wouldn't it work the other way? Again, more on that later. It's probably one of the more fascinating things about this case, but we have so much more phenomena to get through. And also, another thing that I was thinking about is if they could kill David, wouldn't they have? It seems that even in the event of possession, the body still doesn't fully belong to them, especially because most people don't remember anything that happens during it. So it's more like the primary user, you could say, of the body is just sort of offline while they take over. Like, they're still there. If a demon could push out a human soul from its vessel, I'm sure they totally would. There's other things that make me think this same thing, but again, later. Activity always seems to ramp up to the point where even non-believers begin to believe, because Carl Sr. finally came around and insisted on a priest. Welcome to reality, buddy. I have no patience for men who hide from what's happening in front of them until it gets so bad that they relent. Like, wake up. Your son and your entire family is being tortured. Maybe, just maybe, they're not crazy. Not only that, he actually saw the beast projected onto a wall, and he hid that information. I just find this attitude incredibly infuriating, because if I went to my significant other and I was like, hey, I think something demonic is happening, and they were like, really? That's what you think? I'd be like, oh my God, we can't be together anymore, because I can't deal with that. Naturally, being that I am the demon folklorist, I'd be sitting here okay, this, and this, and have a laundry list of things that are happening that are from my own classification system. That would just be because of what I do. But let's say, I thought we had a poltergeist. I would also collect data, but I would expect my significant other to believe me when I say something's happening, because I think that is probably the worst thing in the world, to be told that, no, you're being crazy. No, this isn't happening. No, this isn't real. And it's like, why don't you go fuck yourself? How about that? Anyway, I'm sorry. You find this a lot in not only these types of narratives, but also in horror movies. And I'm just like, just kill that guy. We don't need him for the plot. Carl Jr. eventually also got to the point where he was physically attacking his family because he was being stirred up so much by these things. There was also a show of power that when David was fully possessed, they wrenched David's head around a full 180 degrees. Very The Exorcist. And based on the things that were happening, it's not to say that they can't do it. It's just, this is directly something from a movie. And I'm like, oh my God, do demons get ideas from movies? What a terrible thought. Ugh. But anyway, there was also the smell of vomit. And when this thing inhabited him, David's entire face changed more into it and started talking through him, but the lips didn't move. And he would attack his family, like even trying to kill them. Only holy water being thrown on him would really help anything, but it would end with welts being raised on his body. And this thing, when it was inside him, would complain about the burning. While possessed, things would go whizzing around the room. Then David would wake up unaware of anything that had taken place while he was possessed, thankfully. It also, when it was talking through David, made him make sexual remarks to his mother and his sister. And when it wasn't doing sick shit like that, it went on and on about how it had a right to David's body and soul, blah, blah, blah. God in his unfair kingdom. Same old shit, really, with demons. Like, they are obsessed. Based on their hatred for humans, based on even things that they've said, it kind of implies that they blame humans for being cast out of heaven and for not being angels anymore, if that's the story. We don't fully know, right? But let's just say, for argument's sake, that is the story. Well, that's all they fucking talk about. Like, so it kind of implies that this is a thing that happened to them, right? I don't think every single demon is a once angel, but I do think some of them could be. But that's from my own belief system. I expect nothing less than for you to figure it out for yourself. But yeah, like, demons never fucking shut up about, oh, God is so unfair. He is so horrible. And anyway, the Warrens eventually got involved with this case, and any clergymen who got involved were also attacked. The church, unfortunately, was just not very sensitive to this family's needs past a certain level. This was a very time-sensitive thing. Every day they worried they were going to lose David. So the church, unfortunately, was messing around with paperwork and playing politics while this family was fighting for their child's life. Like, get your heads out of your asses and help them. Okay? I guess I don't understand institutions that sit there and say, oh yeah, like, we'll get involved, but only to a certain point. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't understand that. But again, sorry, any Catholics, it's just, they do have a history of sometimes not acting when they should. But what also made me think this was a more powerful entity was how quickly this infestation, oppression, and possession began everything. This was in days that it became full-on infestation, and the constant oppression of David led him to be fully possessed within a month. That is an incredibly short amount of time. Also, yes, he is a child. But at the same time, to be able to start manifesting to that degree, at that level, it does require a bit of power. At first, the book heavily blames Debbie as the reason that this door is open in their lives, because at one point she had played with a Ouija board that told her all sorts of true answers. And it like had some kind of obsession with her. It like told her it wanted her to make love to it. Like, I don't even know how you would do that. That's obviously accomplishable. But what makes me think instead of demon but jinn is actually jinn are a little bit closer to humans than demons. Although they have traits of both, they used to climb up to the rungs of heaven and listen in on the angels talking about the events of earth. That was how Islam explained how fortune tellers would be right. That's just what it made me think of. I don't know if that's what she was talking to or not. For all we know, she was talking to a demon. Whatever it was had knowledge of past, present, future. And that's weird. Not every spirit has that, I don't think. Otherwise, we'd all be talking to them, trying to figure out what's going to happen to us, right? But I digress because I do that all the time. Anyway, Lorraine Warren called it an incubus. I don't think I believe in incubi, just because incubi and succubi, it seems like maybe it is just a lustful type of fairy or jinn, but I could easily be wrong. It's just that the phenomena seems to indicate that it is something else that is behaving in a certain way, but then it got classified as, oh, because it's lustful for you, it's just an incubi, it's just a succubi. When it's like, what? Like humans aren't horny too? Like, what if the jinn are horny or a fairy is horny and it's trying to come after you? Let's just put it this way. With the amount of fiction that revolves around this exact thing, I don't see a lot of people saying no. But anyway, this always happens to the people who are not into it. Using a Ouija board alone isn't how spirits come into your life. Now, not closing the board sufficiently or correctly could let something in a door that was left open. But just opening the door, it is a risk, but it's not nearly to the level that the Catholic Church would tell you it's at. Like, the probability of meeting a demon on the other side of the board is so low. Like, they are rare to begin with. Now, let's say maybe you had some special purpose on Earth, right? Maybe one could come through, right? I don't know. But it's one of those things that I don't think is particularly dangerous because everyone in the paranormal that I know uses them. The whole reason I don't use them is because I have no interest in talking to the dead. No shade to anybody who does. I'm sure the things they have to say are fascinating. It's just not my thing. But if you did, yeah, you could use one, but you have to learn how to use it. Anything is dangerous if you don't actually know how to use it, right? I'm always talking about the chainsaw metaphor because that's how I feel about Ouija boards. If you don't know how to use it, yes, it could be dangerous because you didn't close the board, close the session, right? But if you do know how to use a chainsaw, it's probably a fairly effective tool for whatever you're doing, right? The satanic panic narrative of it's always the Ouija boards, we can thank William Peter Blatty for that one. Now, you may not know his name, but you do know his story and it already came up. The Exorcist, right? This is something that me and every other demonologist is asked about constantly, and it is annoying. This belief that, so what about Ouija boards? Are they dangerous? Are they evil? And it's like, no, it's a tool. Like, it's a tool just like any other divination method. I've never found that any divination method specifically on its own is evil. It's more like, what do you choose to do with it that can make something evil? But if you're going to use these things, learn how to use them. That's all I'm saying. The other thing that I found, there were also just things within the book that dotted throughout that I just didn't really agree with, like that they use the words possessed by the devil. I hate statements like this because demons are liars first and foremost. And this statement heavily implies that it is Satan himself. A devil maybe, but the devil? Kind of unlikely. Satan doesn't seem to concern himself on the level of possession, but you know, it's hard to say. I don't know what he's doing. I'd think he'd be like, you know, possessing someone super important instead of an 11-year-old kid. But then again, you never know. Demons also, I've found in looking into their narratives, are deeply counterintuitive. There are just times that I'm like, there are easier ways, my dude. And you are sitting here acting like a dipshit. But, you know, I don't have a good opinion of demons in the way that I define them. Something else that occurred to me during this, because this does end in murder, is that if it were possible for a demon to murder somebody during possession, don't you think they'd do it more? There is this overblown view, this overblown fear that once demons possess you, you're done for. You are donezo. And they will kill everybody you love and cause mayhem in the world. When it's like, actually, I've found that the purpose of possession is to kill you, the target. If they could murder, I'm sure all of them would. That's all I really have to say to that. And there's only ever been a few cases ever where somebody was clearly possessed at the time of the murder. I don't think it should be as feared as it is. And there's going to be a little more on that too. Sorry, guys. This is kind of like a deeply disorganized episode, and it's because I'm telling this story in the sequence of events. Other things that were happening is that when David was asleep, his arms would drift up of their own accord, and so would his legs, which like would leave him in like a reverse bow. And then his legs, one of them would turn clockwise, the other counterclockwise. And it's hard to say if this was like messing with his joints or not, but he didn't wake up. So I'm going to kind of assume no. He did wake up, however, unfortunately, when he was kicked in the head repeatedly. And one of the entities came through speaking what might have been English backwards, something that does happen in these cases. And a red blotch appeared on David's leg that was the face of a devil. but it faded within 10 minutes. David was further tormented with his body just very much out of his control and this entity stomping on his back. Then a neighbor called with the news that her dog's back had been smashed, and though he was alive, the poor creature would never walk again and would probably die, like this poor baby. The beast, of course, took credit for doing this to the neighbor's dog because this neighbor had helped out the Glatzels. The beast and his many helpers would even go places with the family. When they were in the car, the speedometer went crazy by passing by a funeral home near the Warrens' place, and the entire back of the car was picked up by these things, while Judy just fought to stay on the road. When they got to a toll booth, the entire car was picked up by these things and levitated, although, because you couldn't see them, it just looked like it was levitated, they'd picked it up. And this was when Judy was, reaching out to give the toll booth worker money, and he was just like, just go. I've had enough today. He just let them go. And I'm like, yeah, dude, same. Unfortunately, on David's birthday, the beautiful cake that they got for him was completely ruined. Breaking glass was heard. There were creaking boards and continual bouncing of poor David's body. Just up and down, up and down. And there was a cross that Arn had been given in confidence that flew across the room and hit Debbie on the forehead. Now, David, when he is David, didn't know about the cross's existence, but naturally the entity did. And when possessed, David could just look at an object and it would whiz across the room. The holy salts from the church just would hurt David instead of helping him. And anytime the church did get involved, at all, it was either met with extreme pain or extreme perversion. The statue of the Virgin Mary became a sex object when possessed David got a hold of it, spewing horrible epithets about her and God and Jesus, and then going on and on about different gross sexual topics that no one wanted to hear. David also was able to describe people he had never met and places he had never been, down to the last detail. And while he slept, David had strange voices issue from him, talking about murder, death, and hell. And Lorraine witnessed David's body bloating to the point that cracks developed in his skin from the strain. Arn did command the entities to leave David and come into himself, but it wasn't an immediate process. It took several times and apparently 6 months to the day, supposedly at 6:06. But that very well could be, but the 666 thing is just so tired. Get new tricks. Stop copying The Exorcist and get some new ideas, guys. It's not like you're the most evil of evil. But anyway, after the initial expelling, there was this period of calm, but it was more like the eye of the storm. What started the new wave of activity was a neighbor getting a call telling her that it could see her and what she was wearing under her robe and her nightgown, and that it was going to do all sorts of perverted shit to her and threatening her if she helped the Glatzels out anymore. At the rectory, there was another threatening call that was made to stay out of their house, and it sounded like Carl Sr., but it wasn't. In the Glatzel home, Alan was also called and told that he'd be stabbed. Oddly enough, though, other people who were not connected to this case also got these weird phone calls in the area. So it's what? Were demons just hanging out on the phone lines all night? Get lives. How about that? David himself began to hear a young girl calling for him to help her, and as he slept, a voice spoke through him that Arn will die at work tomorrow. Something sure tried, because as he was working high up on a tree as a tree surgeon, his rigging suddenly failed, and it could have killed him had his pulley not stopped him. He would have hit the ground. At one point, the family went shopping, and David suddenly went under, stomping his foot on the gas pedal, and Debbie couldn't shift it because he was so strong, and David laughed in a really deep voice as he nearly got the family killed. There was more phenomena that was returning, like humming vibrations, weird square flashing lights parading on the walls of darkened rooms. The beast's head was superimposing itself over family members' faces in their photos that were around the house. There was an empty, unplugged washing machine that flooded the basement. How does that... Did you just apport the water? Things that defy physics were happening. Spirit forms were appearing in the house in hoods. And in full possession, this entity would tell them off in a language that they had never heard, and maybe even one that wasn't human. Like, because it makes me think, do demons have their own language? Because I swear I've heard that angels talk to us in our language for our benefit, but that they have their own language. So it kind of makes sense that demons do as well if they were once angels. Or maybe they just have the language of being filth. Who knows? There was a lot more blasphemy and the changing of prayers around to honor Satan. David having to endure being stabbed, shot, clubbed, the unending, or his body being made to put through unending exercise that caused him to throw up. Using David's body to attack other members of the family, and it became clear it was trying to actively murder them. Arn's continued involvement made him more of a target, with the beast telling him that it would possess him for stopping these near murders. So this tells us that Arn was never the real target. But because he got so involved and irritated this thing so much, it's like, okay, I'm just going to fucking possess you because you kept stopping me. After this is when the first possession of Arn took place. After it had told him that, he went through violent convulsions and his face became distorted just like this entity. He started to growl, but it only lasted for about a minute. Debbie also during this time would wake up to scratches on her in the morning and feeling a cold, scaly arm next to her while she was in bed. Then she actually saw this big, scaly, gray-green claw coming up through the floor, like just a disembodied arm talon, and it would scratch her down her arm and then it would disappear back into the floor. Like, that's not weird. This happened several times, and Arn also witnessed it, and he received strange scratches on his chest. There was also a new kind of intelligence that came through David, replacing the crude perversity, which definitely indicates a lower level entity. And the clergy who were involved with this case were being visited by all kinds of spirits in black. David also held his grandma at knife point and thankfully was stopped. But the entity attacked everyone because they were trying to bring him forcibly to the church for the exorcism, and they ended up having to tie him to a chair with sheets. During the verbal attacks while possessed, David's lips wouldn't move, nor did he blink. His muscles didn't flex, but a voice issued threats from him all the same, as did unnatural strength. He would attack the priests, and there were multiple escape attempts. Even after a full hour of fighting, these spirits had limitless strength and resistance to being exorcised. He also spit on everyone, probably very accurately, hitting them right in the face, constantly screaming blasphemies and profanities, accusing priests of all kinds of sexual activities, naming family members to attack of the priests. A folding knife appeared in David's pocket only to disappear when Ed went for it. It would also mimic David to get them to stop the process. And it tried to choke Father Virgilac, I hope that's how you say that, with his stole when he had convinced them that David was back and that, like, they were hurting him, and they didn't make that mistake again. There was more disfigurement of David's body and choking of the boy to the point that he turned blue. There were tortured animal cries, a hugely swollen tongue, crazed, bulging eyes. The lesser spirits did end up leaving during this exorcism, but it was said that 4 remained, with only one of them being the true power, and that was the one that went unnamed. There was gluttony, lust, an entity called Gaitois, and a devil, which is a very high-ranking demon, pretty much one of the highest. The physical attacks, though, thankfully decreased at least 50% following that exorcism, but the demons hadn't actually left. They were just removed from David's body. They still stayed in the room with him, and phenomena began to be directed at priests. They already had phenomena coming at them, but now they were being targeted. So they would wake up to a pillow soaked in blood, the black form of the beast confronting them, intensely horrible headaches, losing their voice, all sorts of stuff. At Mass, first, Arn saw the spirit behind the priest mimicking what the priest was doing, and then suddenly he was outside with Debbie and had no memory of the Mass, or how he went into a trance and started cursing when the host was presented. And witnesses said that his jaw was open, but it was not moving while these words issued from him. And this to me implies that they can speak through us, but not truly command our bodies, because wouldn't they if they could? To me, it's almost like a puppeteering act, that they get in and they can manipulate the body, but they can't fully take it over. So yeah, it's very much like a marionette on strings. The entity also had predicted everything that came next. Possessing Arn, killing somebody with a knife, and Arn being locked away for it. There was another exorcism that they tried to do, but it failed simply because all the entities had withdrawn to the Glatzel house, and then they moved to the convent after blessed objects were placed in the home. So for whatever reason, they just weren't up to causing mayhem during the exorcism. Or were regrouping. Who knows? I think demons are very counterintuitive, but whatever. David at this time was able to regain a little bit of himself. Like he was, for the most part, even though he could see these things, he was much better and had control of himself. Although at one point he did suddenly get very pissy and angry. Behavior is very similar to when he became possessed again. Father Sheehan was hit by a paper airplane thrown by David and then was being stared down by him. And then suddenly his body started vibrating. His eyes rolled back, and once again, he was under. He started screaming at the priest to leave and needed 4 men to hold him down, and the process started again to control him long enough for an exorcism. The entities fought back violently with words, spit, biting, and attacking David's body, choking, causing a seizure, turning blue, chest swelling, anything that they could do to make it stop. Because exorcism is painful to them. Holy objects are painful to them. It's why they scream in pain when they're hit with holy water or holy oils or what have you. That same night, Ed had summoned the demon to him, see if he could bind it himself. Because there's this whole part, I'm definitely not an expert in exorcism whatsoever, but apparently there is a part of the exorcism where you have to bind the demon separately. I mean, this makes sense to me. Like, not only are you telling it to get out, but you have to bind it so it can't possess again, especially not the person in front of you. So Ed was doing this on his own because he couldn't get the church to authorize it. First, there was this smell of putrid air and then screechings and a sudden stillness. Maybe he was in the bubble, like I was talking about earlier. And suddenly Ed knew that he was in really serious danger because when it appeared, it was described as like this pulsing tar black mass, 7 feet tall. Its body was glossy and throbbing. Had a gigantic head. It was 2 times bigger than a man's with many, many shifting faces. And they were shifting constantly. Mutilated, horrible faces, all of them different. And they had all sorts of levels of monstrosity on each one. Ed realized that these are not 43 separate entities, but they were all the same entity. It was just projecting the differences to David that they were different when they're all the same thing. And apparently each one of the shifting faces had different meanings and sins. And it was a little too much for Ed to handle, but this sounds like a lot, to be honest. If this is a completely true story. I wouldn't want to tackle that one. That sounds like a lot. So he released it from appearing to him, and it left without binding it because he said he knew it was going to kill him. During this time, possessed David was still fighting off the exorcism, and it looked like David had had a heart attack. No pulse, white skin, all that sort of thing. But then Arn repeated the command to take him instead, but unfortunately, he didn't realize that it could actually possess them both. So never invite them to spare a loved one because the truth is you haven't covered any ground. It's not going to save them. Normally, I would say of course people know not to invite a demon into themselves. But at the same time, what would you do? If a loved one was being tortured in front of your eyes, of course you'd want to take it on instead. But thankfully, David did not seem to be aware of a lot of these attacks. At least not when he was fully possessed. It was when he wasn't that they were truly attacking his body. So hopefully this poor guy does not remember this stuff. Even with my own possession, yes, I remember it, but it's way back there. It doesn't have any real bearing on my life today. I don't really think about it very much because it doesn't define me. It's a thing that happened and I don't really think about it too often. Anybody who's ever made it through possession of any kind, it's one of the saving graces we have because you move forward. You have to. But you're not haunted by this, at least not until you deal with it. And there are going to be feelings. It took me, I want to say 2 years to get over it, but that's not like a standard timeline. Everybody gets over different things at their own pace. So if you have had something like this happen, or if you have had some kind of possession experience, be kind to yourself. It's a lot to process, and it's really hard to realize that something took control of you and that you're not really responsible for what you did during those times. Anyway, when Arn eventually came under possession again, the spirit unfortunately hadn't been fully exorcised. It had only been stopped from getting in David anymore, and the church not granting the proper procedure, so this thing was not fully bound to not possess another person. The church was like, all right, we're done. The family naturally felt abandoned by them. The entity also was focusing on Carl Jr. and used him to threaten to shoot Debbie. Carl Jr. did stab Alan with an iron rake, bruising up his mother every time she tried to break it up. Arn's stuff was destroyed, but whatever the core demon was stepped in to help ruin his life. By October, Arn's mom had fled the infested rental after small things just started getting bigger and bigger, and you just can't live near demons and expect things to go right for you. Even if you're not the target, they hate all humans, and just being in their proximity is dangerous. If they don't have a foothold in your life, things will just like really go wrong. But don't blame, like if you're having some really bad luck, there are a ton of things it could be. It's not always demonic interference. And we have to remind ourselves what is happening in the natural before we jump to the supernatural. You know, sometimes life just kind of sucks and the hits keep coming. But if not, I would still never land on a demon immediately because honestly, they're really rare. The oppression of Carl died down by November, but Arn did go under a third time that month for about a minute. There was also a fourth time he was possessed in January for about 5 minutes, punching a hole in a wooden chest, but there were no marks on Arn's hand. And this, again, really supports that idea that they might be using the body like a puppet, but that maybe it's not actually his hand hitting it. It's just maybe like, I don't know, either it is protecting his hand or it is actually hitting it and making it look like Arn is doing it. Because, come on, we're human. If there is blunt force trauma to our hand, it's going to show. We are not built to destroy things and have no mark on us. So that's what I guess I'm saying. It just seems like demons are more acting through us instead of using our bodies. But yeah, that's what I've got so far with that. Like, possessions are interesting, but they're not really my area. I included a section of it in my book because I know that's what people are very interested in. I tend to look at encroachment, infestation, and oppression phenomena. The entities, unfortunately, were still talking to David. God, how horrible would that be? And telling him future events. But for most of the winter, this thing was lurking in the shadows. It wasn't doing a ton to the family. The day of the murder, Arn felt very sick, headache, upset stomach, and chest congestion. He called into work. He couldn't sleep, but he was feeling a little better when he got up a few hours later. Alan Bono, who is Debbie's boss and their new landlord, took them to lunch. Alan, unfortunately, had a very serious drinking problem, and he insisted that the two drink wine with him. They drank like a little bit, but, Arn was still not feeling good, and Debbie had stuff to do. Alan bought more wine on the way back after they bought pet supplies for the kennel. Judy and Debbie also just had this feeling that something was wrong. Judy kept calling every half an hour to get Arn and Debbie to come back, that something was wrong and it had to do with them being at the kennel. Alan really wanted them to stay and have dinner. Arn's sisters were also there to watch Debbie groom dogs, and originally they said no, but Alan was so drunk and obnoxious that they ended up getting some pizzas to appease him. Alan's behavior unfortunately got worse. He started blocking the young girls from leaving, and suddenly Arn was possessed again, and Arn attacked Debbie, kicking her in the stomach, chest, and head. And when Leah startled him, Arn seemingly got control of himself and then asked why Debbie was crying. Like, he had no memory of this happening. Alan was still losing it about them leaving, and he had grabbed young Jennifer by the arm, and he was hurting her. They tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't let her go until Debbie ended up yanking on Alan's hair. Alan then started a fight with Arn, who became possessed again, and this was on the lawn. Alan was taunting him, and Debbie was trying to pull Arn back, but she physically couldn't move him. It was like he was a statue. And there were two voices, apparently, that were emitting from Arn, a screeching voice and an animal growl. And then a roar suddenly issued from Arn, seemingly like victory, but that's kind of like I wasn't there, so I can't tell you if this was like a victory roar. What even is a victory roar? I don't know. Anyway, Alan fell to the ground face first, just went down, bam. Then Arn left. He went back, I think, into the kennel's office. So he left the lawn. All the girls ended up turning Alan over, and they saw a small amount of blood and 2 stab wounds in the front of him. A voice also spoke to Jennifer in a man's voice, telling her that the beast was responsible. Nobody ever saw a knife, though. Leah and Debbie witnessed this event, but suddenly one appeared about 10 feet away. And the last time that this knife had been seen, it had been in the kennel office. It had blood all over it, and it was glowing. This makes me think, again, that possession, the way we think of it, isn't correct exactly. Like, if the blade had to be apported, how capable of murder could this thing be in another's body anyway? It seems like a choice when a person decides to go along with what the demon wants, because Arn was very strong throughout. He resisted this thing constantly, and it could stir him up and take him over. But the murder happening is because it took the knife, stabbed this guy, maybe in the spirit world. I don't know how that works. But based on just even the way that these things are showing up, with the gunshot wound in one of the helpers and then the knife in the other one's heart, it makes me think that weapons in the spiritual are a thing. Like, I don't know how that works either. I'm not going to pretend to know, but what if the armor of God in the Bible, what if it was real armor? Like, it would have to be an astral concept. So not real in the way we think of, oh, it's in our hand, but it exists in spirit. I don't know. But it really does imply that, this case anyway. The fact is, at least according to the girls who were watching this, they didn't see a knife anywhere. Suddenly, the guy was on the ground. Like, so it sounds like they took the knife from the kennel office and apported, or when you apport something, it means it's sort of like teleportation. Suddenly, something that shouldn't be where it is in the physical is there. And it's probably because it's gone through different levels of space to get to you. Like in another Warren case, Ed had reported that there was rocks from the Isle of Wight. And these rocks are only found in Scotland, where this isle is. And it was found in a case because this thing had apported it. The point that I'm trying to make is that I don't think these things are capable of murder in our actual bodies unless we go along with it. And other things that have been committed by demons are usually, again, not through the person's body. It seems like it's done through bilocation. Bilocation is when they use another person's form and appear as them when that actual person is elsewhere. This happened in another Warren case with Maurice, I can't remember his last name, but it's in Satan's Harvest, where he would have a double of him showing up, and it would do horrible things, or it would just go about doing his work because he had, like, supposedly the story is that he had pledged himself to Satan as a kid because he had said something out of anger, and I guess the devil heard him. I don't know. I have questions. This thing had unfortunately raped his stepdaughter, but the stepdaughter thankfully knew that this was not her stepdad. This thing was not him. It was appearing as him. It was taking a familiar form, but it was not him. And I'm sure there were other indicators. It didn't go into the specifics of it, but I'm sure there were other indicators to her that, oh, this is not maybe even human, right? Demons do horrible things. They assume the form of the person, but the other person is like elsewhere. Maybe they're upstairs and then Somebody else sees the double downstairs, stuff like that. Demons seem to need to either assume our form or play with us like puppets, but I don't think they have true control over us, even when they go through the steps of possession. Everything sort of indicates that to me. I could be wrong, though. Like, I accept that I could be completely wrong. This is just what these cases are telling me. David unfortunately knew about this whole plot and reported that the beast had actually possessed Arn and Alan and then stabbed Alan 5 times with the knife. Weirdly, the girls only saw 2 stab marks, and then there were at least 4 by the time the paramedics got there. Then there were 5 by the time that he died in the hospital ER. So super weird. And yeah, poor guy. Debbie and Arn, even though he was a heavy drinker, it sounds like he was being stirred up by this thing. And that by all accounts, he was a fairly nice guy and he was their friend. Arn was found walking along the road dazed that evening. The ambulance driver found him. When he was charged with murder, he was babbling incoherently and then he fell asleep. When he awoke, he didn't know where he was. And again, this is very reminiscent of my own possession experience where I woke up in a mental hospital holding a cigarette and I don't smoke. I did not know where I was. I couldn't see because I didn't have my glasses. It's very jarring to have that happen. You don't know what's happening and you don't know where you are and you're trying to put the pieces together. Arn couldn't remember anything past 6 p.m. and he was extremely exhausted after the possession. Unfortunately, aside from the demonic possession defense, this was a really mishandled case anyway by the cops. I'm sure they saw it as open and shut. The minors were questioned without adults present, and the interviews were not taped, and the non-witness statements were given more credence than actual eyewitness accounts. The statements weren't even written by the girls, but by the police, and Jennifer was made to sign an official statement she neither understood nor could she actually read. So, all of this is bad. And then Megan signed hers when the policeman promised he'd take out references, saying that she saw Arn stab Alan because she didn't. There's also no confession, and unfortunately, you can't really always trust cops. Like, I'm sure not every single cop in the world is a corrupt monster, but they do have a lot of power. Power corrupts. Then the church abandoned them, unfortunately, a second time publicly by denying any support or the story of possession once the murder happened. I'm sure they wanted to distance themselves. David was taken to Quebec in Canada to handle a full exorcism since he couldn't get help from the church. And the father presiding, Father Gerard, was also a psychic, and he gave an explanation for what had happened. The family apparently had been cursed by Satanists who were posing as their friends. And apparently when they went over to their house, like really weird, awful shit and accidents started happening to them. But it didn't ring any weird bells for them when they saw the weird altar and the skulls and the daggers and stuff. And I'm just like, you guys, there were no questions. You were just like, yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry. It's just do people really just not question their surroundings? Anyway, apparently also the last trip that the Glatzels has gone to these people's houses was the anniversary of the date of the murder, and then the family was never found. Okay, I have so many comments about this. First, why? What was the reasoning? Why go through all of that, cursing a family who are your friends? For what? So that you can have the, what do you call it? The favor of a high demon? Demons don't like humans. What do you think is happening here? They're not going to try to kill you too the second they're out of your control. It seems like a lot. It seems like a lot of effort and time. But if that is true, weird as it is, then it's under the category sent. That means that there was magic done to send these things to you. I don't know if you're in Weirdoville and you're in the Weirdoville house and you just don't notice anything is wrong. It seems like too good of a story, and a really convenient, faceless Satanist family posing as normal Americans. It seems a little too perfect. But whatever. I don't know. I don't know the truth. I wasn't there. But when also they were exorcising David, the demon revealed itself to be Beelzebub, who is second only to Satan himself. I'm just like, Why? What, does Beelzebub not have better shit to do? David stopped having problems after this, thankfully. Some other weirdness, though, in the trial itself. The blood on the knife was type O, but it couldn't be identified conclusively as the victim's. There was also no blood found on Arn. Based on the way the stabbing had happened, he should be covered in blood. Arn's fingerprints also weren't found on the blade, and then the blade couldn't even be identified as the murder weapon, nor was there ever like a positive connection between the wounds and the knife. Any knife could have done this. Really, all that they proved is that someone was dead. So that's a lot of weirdness in a case, I think. But Arn was found not guilty of murder, and Arn claimed to hear a voice in the courtroom telling him beware, just like at the beginning with David. But he was found guilty of manslaughter in the first degree, and he was in jail until 1986. The book is weird because it implies heavily with the sentence structure that he was in prison until 2001. But it could be like a word choice. Maybe what they were saying is, oh, at the time that this book was written, he was supposed to be in prison until 2001. So hard to say what's going on there. But yeah, he got out for good behavior within the next 5 years. So the Newport rental had new tenants, and they also experienced horrible phenomena and left within a year. This tells me that this place was already inhabited. David still claimed to see the entity, and so did Arn when he was in prison. And then this entity also presented itself to Debbie's young son, Jason. Jason said that it sat on a throne of bats, spewing fire, and told this poor kid, while he had a raging fever, that it was responsible for the torture and murder of thousands during World War II, and it said it would kill again. David's brother, Carl Jr., also had spoken out about the book that was used for this episode. It's called The Devil in Connecticut, saying the book was a complete lie and the Warrens made up the story to get rich on the backs of their tragedy. He claims that the Warrens told them that they'd be millionaires, but they were confirmed to be paid only about $2,000 for sure. Carl Jr. also claims that David simply had mental health issues and they later got resolved. And truly, this does feel a little bit too neatly wrapped with a bow with that mysterious weirdo Satanist family that disappears without trace after cursing their friends randomly. It just seems weird, right? Like, I know that people do horrible things every day. And you got to remember that there are extremists in every religion. If they're following Anton LaVey's Satanism, it's like a big deal in the Satanist community that they don't hurt others. Of course, they could be a different type of Satanist. At this time, 80s, satanic panic was in full swing, and the Warrens did contribute to this. No matter how you feel about them, this happened. Exactly what happened, whether they're innocent or not, they did contribute. Them talking about how Ouija boards are so evil, and then same with William Peter Blatty and how he depicted a Ouija board possessing a young girl, and then the movie coming out, like it all was related. Just be careful of it was Satanists. Satanists and witches are not the same thing, but if you're talking about magic, most witches, most practitioners are really not focused on you. So that idea that like Satanists are after Christians, it feels like a moral panic to protect the children and a way to almost like unite people against this like common threat of the Satanists. When really, I don't think this form of Satanism where you're actually sacrificing to devils and trying to win their favor and doing all sorts of weird shit. Like seriously, their house sounds like Weirdoville. And like the Glatzels are like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'm sorry. Critical thinking skills, guys. If that is true, man, that sucks. But if it's not, what a weird story to tell. Know what I mean? So anyway, the phenomena tracks. But I actually think that the house Arn and Debbie tried to move into might have just been inhabited before all of this. And that when they tried to move in, they encroached on its territory. That's another way that encroachment can be bypassed. Because they claimed this place as their own and you just walked into their space. If this is indeed a real case and not a complete fabrication, yeah, the phenomena is accurate. It's a very interesting story, whether or not you believe every single thing in it. If this was a real case,
These poor fucking people. Like, my God. I hope they were able to move on and just have normal lives. That's all I would wish for anybody who's ever had possession experiences, because they're horrifying. The reasoning, I'm just a little bit skeptical of. But I'm skeptical of everything when it comes to demons, you know? Anyway, thanks for listening to me go on and on about this case, which is a fascinating case, and all of my different random theories and rants about demonic phenomena. I hope you enjoyed it. And next, we are going to be talking most likely about Zozo and the Zozo phenomenon when it comes to Ouija boards, because it sounds a lot like a virus that spreads. So very interesting, and I just want to look into it for myself. Hope you guys are good. Hope you have a demon-free day and a possession-free day as well. And I will see you guys next time.